And we basically fled the back doors, machine guns came in the front door. But he certainly saw the chemical approach as essentially a drug addiction. It costs more every year, it makes me dependent on somebody else, and frankly, you know, chemical 10-10-10 doesn't grow soil. Then we have to have portable infrastructure. We have to have portable shelter, portable water delivery systems, portable control fencing mechanisms. So, you know, everything in that very open free market was incentivized to good product.
Hi, this is Nick Freitas, and this is Risk Takers. We're here in the beautiful Shenandoah Valley with none other than Joel Salatin of Polyface Farms. And in fact, we're in the very area, the very spot where he does his Lunatic farm tours. Now, why do you call it Lunatic? Well, because when you learn more about where Joel has come from, the sort of work that he does here, and the sort of pushback he has gotten from some of the big boys in the industry as well as government officials, they decided to call him a lunatic. Instead of run away from it, he embraced it and has been teaching other people to do the sort of sustainable farming that he does here on Polyface Farms. Joel, thank you for being with us here today.
Oh, it's my delight and honor to be with you.
Or I should say thank you for having us here. Yeah. Well, first things first, we want the audience to get to know you and your background. And we were talking a little bit earlier today. Can you tell us a little bit story of your folks?
Sure.
And how all this kind of came about?
Sure. Well, you know, probably the greatest blessing in my life now, looking back, is to realize I grew up in a home that embraced different, that embraced being a maverick. And so my dad, after the World War II, he flew in the Navy and got discharged and went to Indiana University on the GI Bill with a desire for business administration. But from his teenage years, you know, this was you know, he grew up in the 30s. And it was Admiral Perry going to the South Pole. It was, you know, it was the kind of final push into some of these uncharted areas, and he just became enamored of the opportunities in the undeveloped world. He saw the U.S. as, you know, we've kind of gone to every corner, you know, and it's done. But he saw a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurs in foreign countries, and land was cheap, and he wanted to be a farmer. No money. How do you get started? So went to IU, and then he hitchhiked to Vermont to Middlebury College, which specializes in foreign language. Spent a semester learning Spanish. Hitchhiked from Vermont to Mexico for imagine that, for 6 months. Stayed with a Mexican family, boned up on his Spanish, and then came back and sat for the Foreign Civil Service exam in Spanish, passed it the first go, and went as a bilingual accountant with Texas Oil Company to Venezuela, where, you know, this was 1948, the beginning of the real oil boom and stuff, and around the world. And of course, those they called them man camps, you know, where the workers would come. The workers were Venezuelans, and the management was Americans, and so the tension was always about money. And so they wanted these bilingual accountants. It was a very specific job description niche for a very specific period of time in history, and quite lucrative, and paid well. And within 6 years, he was able to earn enough and save enough to buy a 1,000-acre farm in the uplands of Venezuela, South America. And meanwhile, he got married, married mom, and mom had caused a fracas in college by wanting to start a non-alcoholic women's fraternity. And so she got blackballed by the university as being a troublemaker, that, you know, she wasn't content with all the, you know, the beer drinking fraternities. And so, you know, they were both mavericks, and went to Venezuela, and the goal was to produce chickens, meat chickens, and milk, dairy. So the food system was the farming community would have their farmers. They would come in. You know how those Latin American countries are with the, you know, the village square, the city square, and all the farmers would set up. Well, then the middlemen, not Walmart and Costco, but, you know, individual middlemen would come, and they would negotiate for product in bulk, and then they would take that through the city and they had their customers, you know, that would get from them. And of course, they're always jockeying for the best bananas and the best papayas and the best pineapples and the best chicken and the best eggs. So, you know, everything in that very open, free market was incentivized to good product. You know, the farmers were trying to have the driest beak chickens. The vendors were trying to buy the driest beak chickens. The senoras were looking to buy the driest beak chicken. Everything was, you know, was incentivized to excellent quality. Well, here we came along, and we raised our chickens, you know, clean and different, and ours didn't have any of this mucus drainage. And so very quickly, Dad cornered the market. Yeah. And of course, you know,
and of course, everyone was grateful.
Oh yeah, yeah. You'd like to think that the other farmers would say, "Oh, Senor Salatin, you know, how do you do this with the chickens?" But no, instead, you know, we were branded as witches and voodoo. You know, it had to be witchcraft and voodoo to do this, and so we were blackballed pretty quickly, and created some, you know, stir in the, you know, these gringos coming down here, you know, and raising clean food.
Your dad had really, this is his dream.
Oh, this was his dream. I mean, he loved the people, he loved the culture, he loved the language, he loved everything about it. He was absolutely living the dream. And then here came a junta, and of Pérez Jiménez in 1959 and on into 60. What happens when you have complete societal breakdown is that it allows scores to be settled that are ancillary to the overall, you know, whatever national political thing. It allows other scores to be settled, and that's why the rule of law is so incredibly important. Is because it's easy for lawlessness to break out into all sorts of little unsettled grievances, because the cops are busy, you know, everything's in turmoil, okay? And so it was conducive to the scores being settled against the Salatins, and we basically fled the back doors. Machine guns came in the front door. We went and lived in a city for, you know, 6 months while Dad visited everything from the local constable to the Venezuela's Interior Ministry, Secretary of the Interior, and on up. And no, it was either what will you pay us? It was either bribe oriented. What will you pay us to protect you? Or it was, you know, we can't do anything. You know, we're afraid we're going to be assassinated too. So, you know, I got my hands full here. And so finally, you know, the door closed. I mean, you know, it was done, and we salvaged what we could. We packed a couple barrels and got in a merchant marine ship coming back to the U.S. and got back to the U.S. in Philadelphia Easter Sunday, 1961, and I was 4 by that time. I'm confident that Dad never got over it. He was 39. I mean, he was this was his dream. He'd worked the prime of his life, and here he was, you know, at 39 in the hole. And I know now when I turned 39, thinking, if I lost it all, would I start over? And he grew a lot in my estimation at that time. It was really powerful.
So your dad obviously, you know, you had your farm taken from you, but he didn't give up on farming.
No.
He comes out here, you get a small settlement, certainly not what you lost, but something. How does that, because we're looking at beautiful pasture right now, but that's not what you guys found when you got here.
We didn't. We had large areas in these fields that are now grass that were, you know, a quarter acre of just rock. There was no soil at all. We had gullies all over deep gullies. One we measured, get this, 16 feet deep from the top of the edge down to the bottom, 16 feet vertical gullies. It was, remember I said that it was absentee owned for about 30 or 40 years, from about 1910. Well, it was sold at a courthouse sheriff's sale in like 1912. And so from 1912 until these New Mexico family in 1948, it was leased out to neighbor farmers who just abused it. and so it was in complete disrepair. You know, the steep hillsides were denuded, just rock and gullies, and you know, it would scarcely feed 10 cows.
Well, and so the settlement you guys received was not enough to replenish 500 acres.
No.
So how did you guys start over?
Yeah. So Dad sought counsel. He sought counsel in both, you know, the public sector, the Extension Service, and private, like Doan Management Consultants. There were just private agriculture consultants. How do I make a living on this little farm? How do I make a living? And every piece of advice was the same throughout all of it. The advice was all plant corn, borrow more money, build silos, buy chemical fertilizer, graze the woods, you know, all that. Well, Dad was sharp enough as an accountant, as a money guy, to know that there was no way that you could compete as a small farmer in the commodity business because the margins are too narrow. Commodity business works fine if you're large scale. But when you're small scale, the margins are too small. You can never produce enough pounds, bushels, whatever, at low margin. Well, with his dad's composting and ecology background, his own economic background, he saw the chemical approach, if not the commodity approach, but he certainly saw the chemical approach as essentially a drug addiction. It costs more every year. It makes me dependent on somebody else. And frankly, you know, chemical 10-10-10 doesn't grow soil. And so that pushed him to looking for what are nature's patterns? What has stood the test of time? How has soil been built? How has fertility been built, you know, before DuPont, before Monsanto, right? For that matter, what kind of food system fed populations for millennia, you know, before Kroger's? And so what our discovery was, and what he discovered was, it's really quite simple. In nature, animals move. They're not confined in buildings. They move. They move outside. Well, if they move onto fresh ground all the time, and that's part of their hygiene, sanitation, immune function, right? Then we have to have portable infrastructure. We have to have portable shelter, portable water delivery systems, portable control fencing mechanisms. And so when people say, oh, you're so clever, you invented all this stuff, I think sometimes they think we just sat around as a focus group and said, let's be clever, you know, let's be clever. But no, our cleverness grew out of a conviction that God's template, if you will, was accurate. And how do we duplicate nature's template on a piece of property? So as you go around the planet and you look for the deepest, most fertile soils, all of them are under perennial grasses. They're not under trees, they're not under bushes, they're under grasses, because grasses have a much more rapid solar collector decomposition cycle than trees and bushes. But they need a partner. The partner is the herbivore. The herbivore is the pruner, and I'm trying to use the word pruning rather than grazing, because grazing now is, you know, politically incorrect. But pruning still has a positive connotation. Yeah. Nobody would fault a viticulturalist for pruning a vineyard. In fact, if a guy didn't prune his grapevines, you'd say he was derelict, right? Yeah. Same thing for an orchardist, apple trees, right? You got to prune your apple trees, and so the forages need pruning as well. And the herbivores did it. But they did it with three basic principles involved. The first one was they moved. They didn't stay in one place. They moved, and they migrated seasonally. Fire, predators, fly cycles, they moved. Secondly, they were mobbed up for predator protection. So they didn't spread out. They were in clumps. In fact, now we know a lot of times they were literally in familial clumps, you know, as they went along. So they were mobbed up. Animals move, all right? So now we got to have portable water, portable fencing, portable. Soil is built with carbon, with decomposing carbon. Well, how do we get more decomposing carbon? And so we got a chipper, and we started, you know, when we worked in the woods, we brought, you know, chips in, and we started composting, and we made a carbonaceous diaper under the cows in the wintertime. So when they eat hay, they poop and they pee in this carbon, and that holds it at a molecular level that can then be composted. Nature doesn't have any waste. There's no waste in nature, you know, and so how does nature, well, you have different animals that eat the waste and control. So in nature, for example, birds follow herbivores. Birds scratch through the dung, the egret sits on the rhino's nose, picks the little, you know, parasites and flies off, and so we developed an eggmobile to follow the cows. So the chickens follow the cows, the chickens scratch through the cow patties, eat out the fly larvae, sanitize, eat the grasshoppers and crickets, and act as a biological sanitizer behind the cows. So you have symbiosis as opposed to competitiveness. You have complementary stacked economic enterprises and ecological stacking as opposed to segregated you know, single function enterprises. And so as we started with the, you know, with the carbonaceous diaper in the barn under hay, well, how do we turn it? Well, you know, you can do it with diesel fuel and create these, you know, windrow compost piles. Instead, we put corn in it. The corn ferments because the cows tromp out the oxygen. You have an anaerobic bedding pack. And cows come out in the spring, start grazing grass again. We go in with the pigs. The pigs seek the fermented corn that's buried in this big bedding pack. And as a result, they aerate it like a big egg beater, convert it from anaerobic to aerobic compost, all with animals that do the work, so that we're using appreciating infrastructure instead of depreciating infrastructure, which changes the profit potential, which creates a scale independent profit potential. The reason farmers have had to get big to stay in business is because when you have to recapitalize all of your infrastructure that rots, rusts, and depreciates, you're on a treadmill. You've got to keep getting bigger and bigger to recapitalize this uncapitalizing infrastructure. But when you use animals to do your work, the chickens to sanitize behind your cows, the pigs to turn your compost, the cows to mow your fields instead of making it into so much hay. You know, when you start using the animals to do all this work that we do mechanically with petroleum, suddenly you're using appreciating infrastructure, and you convert the farm from a primarily energy dependent, capital dependent operation to a management and skill dependent operation, which doesn't have to be borrowed from a bank and never wears out. If you and I were diabolical, you know, if we were like the bad guy in 007, right? James Bond, and let's say we wanted to create. Let's say we sat down and we said, let's create a pathogenic farm. You know, a farm with pathogens. Well, what would we do? Well, first of all, we'd make sure that the farm only raises one species. I mean, we don't want confused pathogens. We want, you know, one species. So we're going to be a chicken farm or a dairy farm or a beef farm or an apple farm or a vineyard. You know what I'm saying? We're going to concentrate on one thing, and then we're gonna confine it real tight. And with animals, we're gonna put them all in a building, and that way the pathogens don't have to work hard between hosts. You know, they've always got a host to go to, and we're gonna deny them, you know, fresh air, sunshine. I mean, sunshine. Sunshine is the ultimate sterilizer, right? So we don't want any sunshine, and and they're going to breathe in fecal particulate all the time. Yes, fecal particulate. You know, it'll be like sandpaper in their tender mucous membranes and make abrasions and hemorrhages along the respiratory tract, so that E. coli and Campylobacter can just go right into their bloodstreams or their oviducts or whatever it is. You know, yeah. And you know, what if I just you know, we could go on like this, but you get the idea. I've just described modern American agriculture. And so, you know, intuitively we understand this, and yet, from a practical standpoint, we act as if nature has no rules, that there are no foul balls in nature. Well, there's a lot of foul balls.
Yeah. Has there ever been a time where you guys thought we might lose it?
Yes, that time. I can't give you the year, but it was in the late 90s, maybe 96, 95. And we got a knock on the door. Food Safety Inspection Service. It's just like on TV. Guy, you know, I go to the door, guy, he's got his big badge like the FBI, you know. I'm from Food Safety Inspection Service. We have impounded all of your beef at the slaughterhouse. You're being accused of selling uninspected product. We've confiscated it, and not only that, you know, your chicken processing is illegal. And that was a big deal. And I remember like yesterday coming out. I was moving the chickens one morning during that week, and I was just kind of, you know, praying and thinking it over. And it wasn't an audible voice, but it was really a profound just impression on my head. For such a time as this. That's what Mordecai said to Esther in the book of Esther in the Old Testament, when she went into King Ahasuerus and pled for her people, the Jews, and she said, well, I can't go in. You know, you can't go before the king unless he extends his scepter, or he kills you. And Mordecai told her, he said, for such a time as this, and it was just a very profound thing, and I took a lot of heart back from that, and we ended up winning that battle. You know, if you've never had a visit like that, what we've learned from that experience is, if you've never had a visit like that, you don't believe it's possible. What? What do you mean? A, and B, you just can't appreciate the heartless bureaucracy of these people. And if you want to see me go apoplectic, just tell me when there's something heartless like this going on, I'm just doing my job. Yeah, that's what the Nazis said when they pushed the gas chamber. Just doing my job, just doing my job. You know, just because you are a regulator working for the government and you have the power of the sheriff and the attorney general and the state police behind you, doesn't mean you leave your heart at home. And I wouldn't say that I hate them. It's not good to hate, but I despise them. There's a deep. Despise is okay. You can despise bad things. Mm-hmm. It's good to despise bad things. And you know, we went through hell for a week. That guy parked on our front doorstep. He demanded our full customer list. I wouldn't give it to him. The main thing we learned from that whole experience was the power of the elected official. The only thing that the bureaucrats fear is the elected legislators, delegates, senators, because that's who they work for. They don't work for me. They work for those elected people. And so we immediately called, we actually had a Republican delegate and a Democratic senator. We called them both. They were both equally helpful to punch through it. And you know, I remember as we were sitting there, as things were, when it was all over, and of course, you know, you're supposed to be able to face your accuser. Well, it's an informant. It's an informant. Well, who? No, it's an informant. And you can't, and of course, you know, their judge, jury, you know, they've got all the things. They've got police tape on your meat. They've impounded it. You can't touch it. How long is it going to take to investigate? Maybe 6 months. Well, by that time it'll spoil. Well, too bad. Well, that's our livelihood for the year. Well, sorry, you know, an informant.
Just doing my job.
Just doing my job. Just doing my job. Informant. In fact, when it was all over, the head guy, and he was finishing up his paperwork and he left, he just looked at me and he said, you know, if everybody treated us like you, we couldn't begin to do our job. And that was like the greatest compliment in the world.
That's your next book.
Yeah, and I thought, man, at least this week of hell for me protected how many other people from harassment from this guy, you know, dealing with them.
Well, and it's the sheer absurdity that you guys have been doing this,
Right.
selling this to your neighbors.
Right.
People aren't getting sick. They're
No.
volunteering doing business with you for generations.
Yeah.
And then one day they just decided, because of an informant,
Yeah.
we can shut it all down and take it from you
Yeah.
and just say, we're doing our job.
Yeah, that's right. I tell people, you don't have to shoot them, all right? But you don't have to bow either.
Yeah.
You don't have to bow either, because these guys are not that sharp. I mean, they're regimented. They're sharp, but they're regimented.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we learned a lot from that, and we're still, you know, we're still pushing back. We don't do, you know, we're now very high profile. There are a lot of people that would like to see us go under. So we don't fight every hill that could be fought on, for sure. But that's why I wrote a book, Everything I Want to Do is Illegal. There are a lot of things. I'll give you an example right now, today, as we sit here right now. We've got a sawmill. We can cut trees and mill lumber. But in our county, so this has nothing to do with food safety laws. This is just an example of government regulation overreach. I cannot legally make a chair and sell it from a tree on my own property that I have a sawmill that I can cut that tree, mill it into lumber. I can't legally make a chair and sell it because that's manufacturing. And we're in an agricultural zone which prohibits manufacturing.
Yeah. Well, Joe, thank you very much. Thank all of you for watching. Again, highly encourage you, go to polyfacefarms.com to learn out more. And if you get a chance, if you're in this area, come to the farm tour. The farm tour is a blast. It's a couple hours of your life that you're gonna really appreciate, learning more about what they do here and how you can potentially be a part of it. I'm Nick Freitas with Risk Takers, and thank you for joining us.